Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Yann Le Flohic, and I am the Deputy Chairman of LSAA, the Life Science Acceleration Alliance. Today, we will explore how recent US tax and trade developments could influence Europe's biotech and life science ecosystem, especially as the EU prepares key initiatives like the Biotech Act, the Life Sciences Strategy, and the revision of the pharma legislation. I am very pleased to be joined by Kajsa Stenström, the LSA's Brussels representative and the founder of Stenstrom Consulting. We'll start by setting the stage from a policy and regulatory perspective. And Cedric Moreau, LSA board member and partner at Sofinnova Partners, who will share his view from the field as an industry expert. Thank you both for being here.
Pleasure.
Kajsa, maybe let's start with you. What's your reading of the current EU-US trade discussions? What do we note about it and its potential impact on the life science sector, particularly for the early stage companies?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. And maybe I'll just say a few points before answering that very tricky question. I've worked in Brussels for over 25 years in EU policy development, both in health, financial services, industrial policy. And I think it's really important to note that the EU has very strong potential to be a leader in these areas, but is faced with a lot of barriers today. And as you correctly said, that has been increased with the external pressure that we now see on the EU institutions. And looking at the EU-US trade talks, we believe that any type of agreement is better than none.
Mm-hmm.
And predictability and stability in EU-US trade relations is really important for investment in Europe and beyond. Of course, it has pushed the EU to look at its own competitiveness. It's already a topic that's on the agenda since the Mario Draghi report. And the institutions are currently really assessing the many barriers that we have in Europe. We don't have a proper internal market in health or indeed in financial services. And I'll just add, in terms of the EU complexity, that we shouldn't forget that what the EU level can do, i.e. the Commission and the other institutions, is quite limited because the member states have kept a big role for themselves when it comes to governing both some of the health laws, many of the health laws, and also indeed on the capital market side. So I just wanted to add those elements to the debate.
Thank you. Thank you. And so in order to continue, what do you consider to be the biggest regulatory or structural barriers for life science startups in Europe today?
How much time do you have? I could easily reference a number of regulatory barriers. Again, coming back to the topic of fragmentation. It unfortunately is not a real internal market in many of these areas. We see it in clinical trials, which is a very hot topic at the moment in Brussels. We need to be able to offer more cross-border clinical trials, faster pace, and also faster approval processes in Europe. And luckily, the EU level, through its recent life sciences strategy and future Biotech Act, is currently looking at those questions seriously. So we've put a lot of hope into the Biotech Act. And of course, we're working very actively with the institutions to shape that act so that it can really deliver on some of these promises for regulatory fragmentation. And again, the regulatory fragmentation is not only applicable to medicine or medical devices approval, but we also have the fragmentation of the Capital Markets Union, which is a different strand of policy and legislative initiatives. Unfortunately, these two chapters don't always communicate, and that's why we believe that LSAA has an important voice in this debate. So we're also working on the Capital Markets Union, trying to move some of the private capital into more life sciences investment in Europe.
Thanks, Kajsa. That's really helpful context at this stage. Cedric, turning to you, from your vantage point as an investor and board member, how do you see the current state of early stage life science innovation in Europe compared to the US and Asia? And what major gaps or bottleneck do you see in Europe's life science innovation ecosystem?
Well, so first, at Sofinnova, we are true believer of Europe and innovation in Europe, and particularly in healthcare and biotech. We are here for more than 50 years now, and we are deploying 70 to 80% of our capital in Europe. And the reason why is that we are convinced that in terms of science, in terms of talents, we are really on par with the top academic and I would say scientist organization, or whatever it's in the US or in China. And all the data are converging to the same conclusion that yes, we are in the race. And if we look at the patent that are filed in Europe and all the innovation that is creating, it's really encouraging. But as Kajsa mentioned, when we are talking about competitiveness, and this Draghi report really is, in terms of diagnostic, absolutely clear-cut and crystal clear, I would say, is that the issue is that if you have one step of the ecosystem on one component that is not enough competitive, is all the ecosystem that is suffering. So I talk about the talents, I talk about the science, yes. But Kajsa started to talk about the fragmentation in Europe, the lack of unification in terms of capital market. This is an issue. For instance, we can just recognize and thanks Europe, EIB, particularly EIF also, that on the private equity market, we did tremendous progress in the last 10, 15 years. So there is now a lot of capital injection in the private equity quite early stage. Where I feel that it's more difficult and we are quite far, the US and Asian standard now, is the late stage capital. We are investing, I don't know, 20% of what is invested in the US. So at some of time, if you have a real goal to scale our companies in Europe, making them growing, accessing the market, you need to definitely increase the late stage capital. And part of it is also the public markets. So I'm very in line and agreed with Kajsa saying that the CMU initiative is a global initiative, but could be absolutely critical to fuel the innovation and helping our companies in Europe to continue to scale. So that's it to me, one of the important aspects that we have to focusing on as a VC, of course, at Sofinnova, but also as a board member at LSA, and we try to make our voice louder for these key topics.
Exactly. And how do you see, I mean, the European early stage life science companies fare in terms of access to venture capital compared to their US peers?
So, and back to what I said, we generally were great to an idea, to create an idea, and then is how we can translate a great idea into a real product and a true company and commercial success. That's the main issue in Europe. So the access to venture capital is absolutely key. So once again, what I said is that we did very, very good progress in the past, but we need more. We need more people at Sofinnova that could invest from the super early stage to the late stage. And for instance, we have launched quite recently a kind of startup studio, a kind of accelerator fund. And it's also another path for Europe is how we can work better to translate this great science most of the time, and usually also that built in the academic and public world into a trajectory that could be a real real company and manage as a true and thanks private capital. So we launched this initiative and funds that is namely a BioVelecita at Sofinnova. So I think that we need more and more this kind of initiative that could help the great science to access to the VC, to the capital, as we have with, for instance, BridgeBio or Flagship, to mention just these two startup and studio lab in the US that were particularly successful.
Can I jump in with a comment there? Because
be our guest, Kajsa.
Thank you. The EU or the Commission has very timely put forward this year a startup and scale up strategy, which of course is a very promising step. It's been refreshed recently. And so we see there's a lot of good intention, but we are really trying to work with the institutions on how to implement these objectives. And as you were just saying, Cedric, it's one thing to emerge as a startup, but then the problem is the scale level. So we're hoping that the institutions going forward can focus a little bit more on the scaling element than only the startup. Of course, we support all of it, but there's some focus that needs to be had there.
Okay, thanks. Let's continue with you, Kajsa. I'm going to ask you a question and let me know if it's quite complicated. If you could advise European policymakers directly, what will be the 3 measures that would most effectively boost early stage life science investment? What would be the 3 measures?
So if I were the president, no, and also I probably, it would be really hard to limit it to 3 because of the complexities that we just talked about. It's such a, there are probably 30 legislative pieces that impact this market. But we have to focus on a few. So let's say generally to have the regulatory simplification, rules that are more harmonized across member states, again, for example, on clinical trials, and more predictability so that we can really attract investors, and also valuing innovation as it should be seen, because we also have the parallel debates, of course, on the ongoing EU pharmaceutical legislation, where we're talking about intellectual property rights and the number of exclusivity years that new medication will or will not be given. That's also part of this debate. So we have to value innovation and intellectual property. We have to have a stable policy, regulatory framework with more harmonized rules. And we need to attack this capital market union beast and try and move some of the pensions and insurance funds into more risky segments in Europe.
Okay, great. And how do you see the EU's current initiatives? I'm thinking about Horizon Europe or European Innovation Council or IPCI in ELF shaping the investment landscape. How do you see this?
So the programs, I think, as such, are always positive to have the potential funding, of course. But I would say that processes are to apply for fundings or funding or grants are very complex. Sometimes they're not the same depending on the country. So this is a barrier, and the private capital needs to have a crucial role as well in the equation. But we do see promising signs in the potential European Competitiveness Fund that will be part of the long-term budget that's now under discussion. But of course, we have to, let's say, compete for the money with other strategic sectors. Biotech, for example, has been identified as a strategic sector for Europe, but so has defense or other areas. And of course, a lot of billions are needed for those sectors. So we have to make sure that the life sciences ecosystem gets its fair share of those programs and opportunities.
Okay, and you, Cedric, when because you are you've got this view, you've got the other way of the end of the spectrum. So what does it look like on the ground? Especially, how should entrepreneurs prepare to be attractive to early stage investors in today's climate of higher capital cost and geographical and geopolitical uncertainty?
Well, first, yeah, you're right. The climate is quite challenging to properly fund biotech with early stage companies right now. It's not so easy. So I think as an investor, one of my advice and tip will be building as much as optionality than possible. Meaning that, of course, you have to have a plan A, and that's great. But in such a challenging environment, you have to prepare your plan B, your plan C, having mitigating plan to be able to react very quickly and efficiently to any kind of issues. Then, when I'm saying that, you can control what you can control. So is what we are saying also as an investor. The macro is there, but most of the time it's not under your control. What you can control is making sure that your capital allocation is efficient, that you focus on the right topics, that you're working hard, and that you try to execute the roadmap given and validated by the board as great as possible. And when I'm saying execution, this is the key word. So what we try to assess as much as possible is the ability of the management to execute. So as an entrepreneur today, having this optionality and these regular updates with investors as us to say, hey, you remember 6 months ago we had this chat, I presented you this roadmap, here where we are. So we did 70, 80%. You don't have to say that you ticked all the box. We know that it's never a straight road. Transparency is absolutely critical, but it's good to say, okay, we did this, and for this reason, we have a delay here, but we have a plan. So that's my tips, having regular dialogue, regular updates, and building this optionality and focusing on execution.
Can I maybe add again? Sorry.
Yeah,
On the
sure.
entrepreneurial point.
My comments are inspiring for Kajsa.
Very, yes. On the entrepreneurial point, I think it's such an important topic because that's what we keep coming back to in Europe as well, this risk aversion that seems to be very strongly rooted in our history and culture for some reason. And of course, that's not something that we can change in a day. But also there, the EU is now debating a range of measures, for example, financial education or financial literacy to allow SMEs to scale and to understand the value of taking risks, and also for ordinary citizens to move some of their private savings into more interesting investments. So it's all part of a holistic approach that needs to be driven forward by someone.
And Kajsa, you did well to precise that, because also sometimes people have in mind that there is the entrepreneur in one side of the table and the investors in the other side. We are working together. We are in the same boat, and we try also, you talk about education and preparation, because when I talk about optionality, is mainly about how we can prepare the company and your team. And as an investor, we are used to do that. It's in our DNA. So we are in the same boat, and we try to coach, to advise, and to help our CEOs and management team to I would say tackle this quite challenging environment. So it's appropriate statement that you said, and I benefit from this one to also claim that we are together.
The question for you two, for Cedric or Kajsa, and feel free to start, Kajsa, maybe, or what needs to be done to ensure that the promising innovations are scaled in Europe rather than relocating abroad? What we need to consider in order to keep it here in Europe?
All of the above. I think we've touched on many of the points, and I want to add that the research, innovation, talent is not what's lacking in Europe. It's transforming that into the commercial opportunities and having the right framework for investors to dare to go for Europe or choose Europe, to quote the European Commission.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of capital efficiency, we are pretty good in Europe. If you compare US, saying that US is beautiful, fine, but if you compare the cash burn and what we are able to do in Europe with much less money than in the US, you can conclude that capital efficiency is quite good and quite impressive in Europe. So I think the US has to come at the right time. Once again, it's preparation. You cannot cross the Atlantic from one day to the other, but starting to present your management, present your company, your plan, and having a kind of what we call testing the water roadshow to interact with US investors and coming back 6 months after, 3 months after. I think that's the right way to go, because what is true is that the pharma market is mainly a US market. And in terms of pricing, in terms of commercial opportunities, in terms of M&A transactions. So a certain of time you have to be there. But is not mandatory to start being in the US or something like that. And in Asia, for instance, it's more the opposite. What we try to do at Sofinnova is more trying to benefit from the innovation trend. For example, in China, but Japan, Korea, went in Korea early September. It's quite amazing to see also the level of science and the quality of the asset and opportunity in terms of in-licensing in. So chasing and hunting some drugs, and that you can import in Europe, because then you can also benefit from a great ecosystem here to make your companies advancing. So I would say, all in all, US for sure has to be a target, an objective, but most of the time it's more long-term objective than a short-term priority. Lots can be done in Europe, but of course we need also to continue, and that's the rationale of the DNA of LSAA, and what the reason why a fund as Sofinnova wants to really be invited at the table, be part of the discussion, be more vocal, if we want to first preserve the innovation in Europe, but even as Kajsa mentioned with the Draghi report and so, increasing the competitiveness here on our European playground.
Kajsa, Cedric, thank you both for a really engaging conversation. We've heard how policy frameworks and investment realities are evolving, and how Europe can turn today's challenges into opportunities. So thank you both of you in order to share that. Thank you also to everyone joining us. That was the first webinar that we have organized for a while now, and stay tuned for more LSA discussions as we keep exploring how to accelerate innovation in life sciences across Europe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.